The sheets looked different in the moonlight. That's what my brain fixated on as I stood frozen in the doorway of my own bedroom at 2:17 a.m. Not the two bodies tangled in our California king. Not the whispered laughter that died the moment I flipped on the hall light. The sheets, the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets Janelle had insisted we needed because Cameron, we've worked too hard to sleep on anything less. I couldn't move. The cold mountain air from our open window sliced across my face while I stared at my wife and a stranger in our bed. Our bed, the one centered perfectly beneath the wedding photos I'd had professionally framed. 10 years of marriage displayed in silver frames that caught the hallway light, reflecting it back like accusations. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I'd been the one scrambling for clothes in a hotel room when Janelle had tracked me down. The one avoiding eye contact while she stood in the doorway, her world crashing down around her. I'd promised her then it would never happen again. That Angela from the Chicago office meant nothing. That the late nights in Atlanta with Rebecca were just business. Cameron, I can explain. Janelle's voice sounded distant, like she was speaking through water. The stranger, a man I vaguely recognized from her marketing firm, was already scrambling for clothes, head down, avoiding my eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my 2 a.m. investor in Singapore. Reality check. This was happening. I was Cameron Williams, 41-year-old venture capitalist, standing in my Denver Highlands master suite while my life imploded. Again. I need to get the children. It was all I could think to say. Protect Sylvia, Sanae, and Elijah. My teenage daughter would understand too much. My younger daughter and son might understand just enough to be scarred. The children are at my mother's. Janelle's voice steadied as she pulled the sheet higher. Remember, the overnight? Cameron, please. Can we talk about this tomorrow? When we're what? The words finally erupted. When we're dressed? When your friend is gone? When I've had time to pretend this isn't happening? The hypocrisy of my own outrage tasted bitter in my mouth. I backed out of the room, nearly tripping down our floating staircase. The house we'd built together suddenly felt like a stage set, beautiful but hollow, fake, just like our marriage had become. The next morning, I was in my office by 6 a.m. 3 cups of coffee deep, spreadsheets open, tie perfectly knotted despite sleeping in my car. If I could just focus on the Miller acquisition, structure the deal perfectly, prove I still had control somewhere in my life, maybe the image of my wife with another man would stop replaying behind my eyelids. But control was an illusion I'd been chasing for years. The same illusion that had made me think I could have both a perfect marriage and perfect affairs, that I could compartmentalize my life like a portfolio, love here, lust there, family obligations in this column, personal desires in that one. Cameron, your 9 o'clock is here, my assistant announced, concern evident in her eyes. I'd worked with her for 7 years. She knew something was wrong but wouldn't ask. I was grateful. Send them in. I straightened papers that were already straight. And hold all calls unless it's about my children. 3 meetings, 2 conference calls, a lunch I didn't eat. By 4 p.m. I was driving home, dreading the conversation that waited. Traffic on I-25 crawled to a standstill, and I gripped the steering wheel. That's when it happened. A billboard for some church caught my eye, with a partial Bible verse I recognized from childhood Sunday school. Though your sins are like scarlet. My grandmother's voice finished it in my head. They shall be as white as snow. I shook it off. God and I weren't exactly on speaking terms these days. Not since I'd made promises in his name that I'd broken over and over again. Janelle was waiting when I arrived home. Sitting at our kitchen island, makeup perfect, as if armor for the battle ahead. The same island where she'd confronted me about Angela 3 years ago, her voice breaking as she asked if I'd ever loved her at all. The children will be back tomorrow afternoon, she said. We need to decide what to tell them. How about the truth? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. That mommy decided our vows were optional? The words hung in the air, and I immediately regretted them. After what I'd put her through, I had no right to moral outrage. Our vows? Janelle's laugh was hollow. Cameron, you broke those vows 3 years ago, and again 2 years ago, and probably times I don't even know about. What followed was 3 hours of accusations, tears and revelations I'd hoped would stay buried. She threw my own infidelities back at me with surgical precision. Every hotel receipt she'd found, every late-night call she'd overheard, every lie I'd told and promise I'd broken. You're never here, Cameron, Janelle said, eyes red but voice steady. And when you are, you're not really present. You live at that office. When was the last time you asked about my day? About Sylvia's dance recital? About Elijah's science project? You're a ghost in this house. You have been since before I forgave you the first time. She wasn't wrong, but neither was I. Not entirely. So you decided to fix our marriage by doing exactly what I did. That's your solution to feeling neglected. Find some consultant from your firm and bring him into our bed? His name is David, Janelle said quietly. And he listens when I talk. He asks about my dreams. He knows I wanted to be a writer before I became a mother. He sees me, Cameron. When's the last time you really saw me? The conversation cut deeper than any business negotiation I'd ever endured. Janelle wasn't just angry. She was tired. Tired of pretending our marriage was healthy. Tired of being the wife of successful Cameron Williams while feeling invisible in her own life. I forgave you because I loved you, Janelle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I believed you when you said you'd change, but you never did. You just got better at hiding it. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you came home before 8? When's the last time you prayed with the children? When's the last time you touched me without it leading somewhere else? Her questions landed like physical blows. I called Quincy the next day, my closest friend since college, now CFO at a competing firm. I needed someone to talk to before facing my children, someone who wouldn't judge me for the mess I'd made. She did what? His outrage was comforting. In your bed, man? That's cold. I spilled everything. My pain, my confusion, my fear of losing my children in a custody battle. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him about my own affairs, about the moral quicksand I was standing on. The conversation helped, until 3 days later, when I walked into a partner meeting and found the Miller deal had been reassigned. We heard you're going through some personal issues, the managing partner said, not quite meeting my eyes. Quincy mentioned your divorce might be messy. We can't risk the client relationship. The betrayal knocked the wind from me. Quincy had used my pain as leverage, feeding information to my partners to position himself for the deal I'd spent months cultivating. Betrayal felt different when you were on the receiving end. 6 months earlier, life had been a highlight reel for Cameron. The view from the corner office at Elevation Capital Partners stretched across downtown Denver to the mountains beyond, a daily reminder of how far I had climbed. Not just in altitude, though the Highlands neighborhood where Janelle and I had built our custom home sat at a prestigious elevation, but in attitude too. Another round of funding secured, I announced to the team that Tuesday morning, watching their faces light up with the news of the $30 million deal. That's 3 unicorns in our portfolio this quarter alone. The congratulatory emails poured in all day, the board members practically falling over themselves to praise my vision. This was the life I had always imagined: respect, influence, the ability to move markets with a single decision. The corner office with its glass walls and mountain view was just the visible manifestation of all that hard work. But success had become my drug, and like any addiction, it required increasingly dangerous risks to achieve the same high. The late nights weren't always about work anymore. Sometimes they were about Angela from the Chicago branch, sometimes about Rebecca from Atlanta, sometimes about women whose names I tried to forget as soon as I learned them. At home that evening, I pulled the Tesla into the heated garage, juggling a briefcase in one hand and phone in the other. Janelle had texted 3 times during the final meeting, something about Elijah's science project and needing help, but there would be time for that later. There was always time later for the small stuff. Daddy's home. Sanaa came running down the hallway, her little arms outstretched. Behind her, Sylvia rolled her eyes in that particular teenage way that somehow conveyed both affection and embarrassment. Hey, baby girl, I said, scooping up Sanaa while still thumbing through emails. Where's your mama at? She said she had to run to the store, Sylvia replied, not looking up from her phone. Elijah's upstairs. He's been waiting for you to help with his science thing. I felt a twinge of guilt, but pushed it aside. Tell him I'll be up in 20. Just gotta finish this one thing. 20 minutes stretched to 40, then an hour. When I finally made it upstairs, Elijah was already in bed, the half-finished model of the solar system sitting abandoned on his desk. I stood in the doorway watching the boy sleep, promising silently to make it up to him on the weekend. The same promise I'd made after every missed game, every forgotten commitment, every time I'd chosen work over family. On the drive to work the next morning, an old hymn unexpectedly came through the speakers. Great is thy faithfulness. My finger hovered over the skip button but hesitated. Grandmama used to sing this while cooking Sunday dinner, her voice rising above the sizzle of chicken in the cast iron. For a moment I felt a strange hollowness, a whisper that something important was being neglected. Not now, I muttered, switching to Bloomberg radio instead. I couldn't afford to think about faithfulness, God's or my own. The quarterly projections weren't going to review themselves. Sundays meant church, of course. The Highlands Community Chapel was where everybody who was anybody in Denver's black professional circle made their appearance. Janelle and I sat in the third row, children perfectly dressed, the very image of success. Pastor Wallace nodded our way during the sermon about seeking first the kingdom of God. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was seeking first the kingdom of Cameron Williams, and God was somewhere down the list below: career advancement and personal satisfaction. Good word today, I said afterward, shaking the pastor's hand while mentally reviewing talking points for Monday's investor call. Cameron, I've been meaning to ask if you'd consider joining our men's prayer breakfast, Pastor Wallace said, holding onto my hand a beat longer than necessary. We meet Wednesdays at 6 a.m. It's been transformative for many of the brothers. I appreciate that, Pastor. Let me check my calendar and get back to you, I replied smoothly, knowing full well that 6 a.m. was reserved for the gym, the only time to maintain the physique that had caught Angela's attention at that Chicago conference. At home that night, while tucking in Sanaa, she looked up with those innocent eyes that sometimes saw too much. Daddy, why don't we pray anymore, like when I was little? The question caught me off guard. What you mean, baby? We pray at church. But we used to pray at home too, before bed and dinner and stuff. I kissed her forehead. We'll start again tomorrow, okay? Promise. But tomorrow became next week, became next month. The promises piled up like the unread devotionals on my nightstand, and the ignored calls from pastors who wanted to counsel our marriage. The signs were there in other ways too. Janelle started attending separate church activities, citing schedule conflicts. The text messages became fewer, the conversations shorter. I noticed but filed these observations away as problems to solve later, after closing the new tech acquisition, after the board retreat, after the next big win. You're never really here even when you are, Janelle said one night, the only time the subject was broached directly before my affairs were discovered. It's like we're all just supporting characters in the Cameron show. That's not fair, I had responded, genuinely hurt. Everything I do is for this family. The hours I put in, the networking, the travel, it's all so we can have this life. I had dismissed it as stress talking. After all, our life looked perfect from the outside. The house in the Highlands, the vacations, the private school tuition payments that never bounced. If there were problems, I would fix them, like every other challenge that had ever presented itself. That Sunday, as the family sat in our usual pew, Pastor Wallace preached from Proverbs. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. I checked emails during most of the sermon, pausing only when the pastor's voice seemed to grow louder. Some of you have built your houses on sand. You've constructed these beautiful lives that look stable, but the foundation is cracking beneath your feet. For just a moment, I felt exposed, as if the pastor were speaking directly to the empty spaces growing in our home, in our marriage. But then my phone vibrated with an alert about a potential new investment opportunity, and the moment passed. How could I have known then that in 6 short months, everything would shatter? That the perfect life so carefully constructed would collapse like a house built on shifting sand? That I would find Janelle in our own bed with someone else, forcing me to confront the hypocrisy of my own moral outrage? I became a man with a mission. Cameron the fixer. Cameron the solution provider. Cameron the venture capitalist who could solve any problem with enough strategy and resources. But this problem was different. This problem had a history. This problem had a context that made my righteous anger feel hollow and hypocritical. First step was damage control. I told the kids that Janelle and I were working through some adult issues. Elijah just nodded, eyes glued to his game. Sanaa hugged my leg while Sylvia rolled her eyes, probably already knowing more than I wanted her to. Kids always know. I downloaded every relationship app the Apple Store offered, paid for premium subscriptions to 3 meditation programs, bought books on forgiveness, the shopping cart of a desperate man. But the meditation app couldn't quiet the chaos in my head. Every time I closed my eyes to find inner peace, I saw not just Janelle in our bed, but myself in hotel rooms with women whose names I'd tried to forget. You need to get away, clear your head, my colleague suggested over lunch. So I volunteered for every business trip possible, told Janelle it was to give us space to think. Truth was, I couldn't stand being in that house with the weight of our mutual betrayals suffocating every conversation. Threw myself into 80-hour work weeks. The venture capital world became my sanctuary. Numbers don't lie. Projections don't cheat. Acquisitions don't have messy emotional baggage. I was Cameron the executive in those boardrooms, confident, commanding, in control. Then I'd come home to be Cameron the hypocrite, and the mask would slip. You're working too much, Janelle complained during one of our cold mechanical conversations across the kitchen island. I just smiled. Somebody's got to keep the lights on in this altitude-high lifestyle you've grown accustomed to. The passive-aggressive comment hung in the air between us. Like you kept the lights on when you were in Chicago with Angela? Janelle's response was quiet but deadly. Or Atlanta with Rebecca? Should I keep going? Week 3, I opened a secret bank account. Just in case, I told myself. Started diverting small percentages of my commissions there. Not enough to notice, just enough to build an escape fund. All while telling friends and family we were working on reconciliation. The double life was exhausting, but I was practiced at living multiple lives simultaneously. Janelle agreed to counseling after I threatened to tell her parents what happened. But the threat felt hollow. Her parents had supported her through my affairs. They knew who the real villain was in our marriage story. We made it to exactly 2 sessions before she started finding excuses. Work emergency, migraine, car trouble. The counselor gave me sympathetic looks that made me want to scream. What she didn't know was that Janelle had good reason to avoid a professional examination of our relationship. Mr. Williams, the counselor had said during our second session, relationships require both partners to take responsibility for their actions. What do you feel you contributed to the breakdown of trust in your marriage? The question hung in the air like a landmine. Janelle sat quietly, waiting to see if I would finally be honest about my own betrayals. I deflected, talked about work stress and communication issues. The look of disappointment on Janelle's face told me everything I needed to know about my cowardice. Cameron, Brother Thompson pulled me aside one Sunday. You know the church has a restoration program for brothers who've struggled with faithfulness. Maybe it's time to consider. I appreciate the concern. I cut him off. But Janelle and I are working things out privately. I bought Janelle jewelry, expensive stuff, not because I felt generous, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of guilt every time she put it on. You like it? I'd ask with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It's beautiful, she'd say quietly. Just like the bracelet you bought me after Angela and the necklace after Rebecca. We both knew what game we were playing. The paranoia grew. I checked her phone while she showered, installed tracking software, came home at random times, became the very thing I despised, a man without dignity, scrambling for control. The irony was suffocating. I was surveilling my wife the same way she'd surveilled me during my affairs. The kids noticed. Elijah stopped asking me to play basketball. Sylvia barely spoke to me. Sanaa would crawl into my lap and ask, "Daddy, are you sick?" 6 weeks in, I tried church hopping. Maybe a new congregation wouldn't see the failure written all over my face. Bought a cross necklace. Started throwing blessed and prayer warrior into conversations. Janelle saw right through it. "Since when do you talk like that?" she asked one night. "God and prayer didn't matter when you were cheating on me. Why do they matter now?" I had no answer. I joined the men's Bible study at our regular church. Sat there with my leather-bound Bible, highlighted verses about forgiveness while plotting my exit strategy. The disconnect was total. These men shared tears and struggles while I nodded sympathetically, completely walled off. Cameron the fraud, playing both victim and perpetrator simultaneously. The breaking point came during a late night at the office. I was staring at projections for a new healthcare startup, numbers that would normally excite me. Nothing. Just emptiness. My office with its view of downtown Denver might as well have been a prison cell. I'd built this career, this reputation, this life in the highlands with its altitude and attitude. For what? To lose my family twice? To destroy the same woman who'd forgiven me once already? I drove home at 2 a.m., walked into our bedroom where Janelle was sleeping. Stood there watching her breathe, the hatred and love all mixed together, until I couldn't tell them apart. But underneath it all was something worse. The crushing weight of my own hypocrisy. I went downstairs, poured myself a drink, and allowed myself to actually feel the pain instead of managing it. Not just the pain of her betrayal, but the pain I'd caused her. The pain of watching someone you love choose others over you, again and again. That night, sitting on my deck overlooking the city lights, I realized my success had become my God. My control had become my religion. My pride had become my downfall. And both of us, Janelle and I, were drowning in the wreckage of my choices. "Jesus, please, I need help. I need to change before I lose my wife and family," I whispered. I didn't know it then, but Jesus immediately answered me. The empty house echoed with every step I took. 3 weeks since Janelle had left, taking Sylvia, Sana, and Elijah to her mother's place across town. I had insisted on keeping the family home, thinking somehow that maintaining the physical space would preserve what was already broken. I wandered from room to room, straightening picture frames that didn't need straightening. The venture capital firm had granted a leave of absence after I showed up to an investor meeting wearing the same suit 3 days running. Even in crisis, appearances mattered. Even when your life was falling apart for the second time, you still had to maintain the facade. This altitude is getting to me, I muttered to no one, a habit formed in the endless silence of the house. But it wasn't the thin Denver air causing the tightness in my chest. It was the absence of small voices arguing over cereal choices, of Elijah's endless basketball dribbling in the hallway, of Janelle's perfume lingering in the bathroom. The kitchen island was covered with legal documents. I had been avoiding them for days, pushing them around like unwanted vegetables on a dinner plate. The words petition for dissolution of marriage stood out in bold at the top of the first page. Janelle had actually done it. While I had been plotting reconciliation strategies like some corporate takeover, Janelle had simply moved on. Unlike 3 years ago when she'd fought for our marriage despite my betrayals, this time she was walking away. I slumped onto the bar stool, finally reading the papers. The clinical language described 15 years of marriage reduced to assets and liabilities, custody arrangements and visitation schedules. My hands trembled, not with sadness but with rage and recognition. I'd brought us to this place twice now. I pushed away from the counter, grabbed the car keys and headed for the scheduled marriage counseling session. Janelle had agreed to 6 sessions before finalizing anything. It was something, it was hope. I rehearsed all the right things to say, all the promises to make, the strategic approach to winning back what was lost. But sitting in the car outside the counselor's office, I couldn't move. Through the window, Janelle was already inside, her back straight, her hair pulled neatly back. She looked composed, resolved. I recognized that posture. It was the same one she'd adopted during my affairs, protective, distant, done. The carefully prepared speech dissolved in my throat. What was the point? This wasn't a venture capital negotiation where the right PowerPoint deck could save the day. This wasn't a problem that my Harvard MBA could solve. This was a woman who had forgiven the unforgivable too many times and was done. I started the car and drove away. No destination in mind, just away, away from the counselor's office, away from the empty house, away from the truth that was becoming unavoidable. The family was gone. The marriage was over. I had destroyed it all. Twice. The car somehow found its way to Spear Boulevard Bridge. I parked and walked to the railing, looking down at Cherry Creek below. Not high enough to be fatal, probably, but high enough to hurt, high enough to match the pain inside. Lord, if you're there, now would be a really good time to show up, I whispered, feeling foolish immediately. Years of Sunday attendance at church, years of half-hearted prayers and distracted worship, and now I wanted God to appear like some spiritual consultant to clean up my mess? Then, cutting through the silence, came Elijah's voice in my memory. Dad, you promised to come to my game on Saturday. You promised. The disappointment in his young face, the resignation already setting in at 12 years old. He was already learning that my promises were negotiable, just like his mother had learned. I stepped back from the railing. The children, whatever else happened, there were still the children. Sylvia the teenager, already struggling with her own identity in the wake of our family's dysfunction. Little Sana, still believing in fairy tales and happy endings despite the evidence around her. Elijah, trying so hard to be the man I had failed to be twice over. Back in the car, I cried. Jesus, please, please help me. Save me. I gasped between sobs. I don't want to lose my family. Please save us. Maybe I don't deserve another chance. I destroyed my marriage, betrayed my wife, failed my children. I don't deserve their forgiveness. I don't deserve yours. But I need it. I need you. The first real prayer I had ever prayed was this broken surrender. The Denver highlands had never felt so cold, even though it was mid-July. I'd been driving aimlessly for hours after another failed attempt to fix things with Janelle. 4 months had passed since I caught them in our bed. My life had become an endless cycle of rage, bargaining, and desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable. I never planned to meet Jesus in the back pew of an empty church at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. But Cameron the husband had nothing left to salvage after destroying his marriage twice. Cameron the father couldn't bear to face Sylvia, my teenage daughter who knew too much about her father's failures. Sanaa, who sensed something was wrong, or Elijah, who had started acting out at school. The church door was unlocked. Strange for that hour, but I didn't question it. I just needed somewhere to sit where I wouldn't be tempted to check that tracking app again or drive past another hotel where I'd betrayed my vows. You can stop now, I heard myself say out loud in that empty sanctuary. Stop pretending you've got this under control. I'd been to church my whole life, said all the right prayers, knew all the right answers, but sitting there I realized I didn't know Jesus. I knew he died for my sins and would take me to heaven when I died, hopefully. But I didn't know why or if he would still do that for me. I couldn't accept that he loved me in this condition, or that he wanted the best for me. Jesus, I whispered. Why am I like this? How can I be so contradicted? I know what's right and yet, I get it all twisted and do the opposite. I've hurt my wife and I love her. Why would I do that? The presence that filled that sanctuary wasn't like anything I'd experienced in all my years of religious performance. It wasn't emotional manipulation or spiritual hype. It was as real as the wooden pew beneath me, as undeniable as the Denver altitude that makes your chest tight until you acclimate. That night changed everything and nothing, all at once. My marriage wasn't suddenly fixed. Janelle and I still had mountains of pain to navigate, pain I had caused through my affairs, pain she had caused through hers, pain that had accumulated over years of choosing everything else over each other. The kids still carried wounds that would take years to heal. But I believed Jesus would walk us through it all. Pastor Wallace called it my altitude adjustment. He became my spiritual sponsor of sorts in those early days of genuine faith. Cameron, he'd tell me, you've been trying to breathe at 30,000 feet without the oxygen of Jesus' love. No wonder you're suffocating and everyone around you too. The difference between control and covenant, Pastor Wallace explained during one of our sessions, is that control is about managing outcomes. Covenant is about faithfulness regardless of outcomes. That distinction saved my life and eventually our marriage. But first it required brutal honesty. Janelle and I separated for 8 months. Not my plan, but necessary. We both needed to find Jesus individually, her for the first time, me for the real time, before we could find each other again. When she finally agreed to counseling, our therapist asked what we wanted. I want my family back, I said automatically. That's an outcome, she replied. What do you want for yourself? I sat with that question for a long time. I want to be a man who loves like Jesus, whether Janelle comes home or not. I want to be faithful even when it costs me everything. Those words surprised me as much as everyone else in the room. They weren't strategy or manipulation. They were truth I hadn't known was in me. The counseling sessions were brutal. Week after week, we unpacked the damage, my affairs, my workaholism, my pride, Janelle's affair, her resentment, her decision to give up on us, both of our refusal to fight for what we'd promised to protect. I forgave you because I thought that's what Christian wives do, Janelle said during one particularly painful session. But I never healed. I never processed the betrayal. I just buried it and tried to move on. And I took your forgiveness as permission to keep living the same way, I replied. I never changed. I just got better at hiding. Rebuilding has been slow, messy work. Some days I still wake up with that venture capitalist mindset, trying to optimize our recovery, benchmark our progress. Elijah still struggles with trust. Sylvia went through a phase of testing every boundary, convinced relationships always end in betrayal. Sanchor still crawls into our bed some nights, making sure we're both still there. And Janelle? We're writing a new covenant, day by day. Not perfect, but authentic. Built on truth instead of image, grace instead of performance, Christ instead of my efforts to hold everything together. We renewed our vows last spring, not as a fairy tale ending, but as a new beginning rooted in something deeper than success or failure. Something deeper than our ability to hurt each other or our capacity to forgive. We built our second marriage on the foundation of Jesus Christ, the only one strong enough to hold two broken people who'd learned they couldn't save themselves or each other. I still catch myself slipping into performance mode at church sometimes, trying to be the poster child for Christian redemption. That's when Jesus gently reminds me that my testimony isn't about Cameron's comeback story. It's about his faithfulness when I had nothing left to bring to the table but my failures and my need.